I'm in a real studio here. Good morning, everybody, or good day, or wherever it is that you are in this globe, because we are becoming very, very global here. And I want to welcome my guest, Bridget Stumpf, to Under the Hood. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, and then she's going to tell you a lot more. So, welcome, Bridget.
Thanks so much for having me, Tina. It's great to be here.
Okay, so I kind of had to kind of make the bio a little bit shorter, and because she's at, I don't know how old you are, and I'm not going to ask that on this, but you look very young to have accomplished as much as you have. So,
I've lived
Bridget,
many lives.
I know what you mean. So she is a survivor's right advocate working to create restorative and trauma responsive ecosystems. That sounds like a very complicated, interesting kind of thing that you're doing, Bridget. So you are an attorney and you're the CEO and founder of Volare. Is that how we would spell it?
Volare.
Volare?
Volare. Yes.
Okay. A position she has held since co-founding the organization in May 2012. She's an accomplished nonprofit leader with over 15 years of experience advocating on behalf of survivors of crime. So you've had something to do in common with Kamala Harris, it sounds like. That was her background, if I remember correctly. And so I'm going to let you, you've won all kinds of awards and honored by the DC Bar of the District of Columbia Bar Association for the Constance L. Belfiore Quality of Life Award in 2025 and the American Bar Association's Criminal Justice section in 2019. So that's a lot, and I know you do a lot. So tell us a little bit. So this is called Under the Hood. And what we look at here are patterns that are created in childhood impact us as grown-ups.
Mhm.
And I'm most interested in interviewing leaders like you as role models, for one thing, and to give some insight. A lot of times people think, oh, she's just lucky. She's got all this stuff going for her, and she had this and she had that. And we're coming on my third year of doing this podcast, and people's stories are quite amazing.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your background, your family of origin, things that you think would be really interesting and helpful for us to know about you.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Tina. I actually really love this idea of how patterns in childhood shape who we become. It's so central to the work that we do working with trauma survivors, knowing that folks can experience one or many traumas throughout, the continuum of their life. And it's such an important question to ask how we might engage with someone differently, knowing
Yes.
that they're a trauma survivor. So I just love that you're creating this sort of wraparound view of thinking about how people show up in their leadership work. And for me, I would say it was a little bit of luck, a lot of hard work. The luck is a little bit there. I grew up in a very rural part of the country. I'll just say, like, the average household income today for a family of four is still not $40,000. So we're talking
Wait,
about
I lost your sound for a second. Just say it again. The average,
yeah,
say it
the
again.
average household income today for a
Hmm.
family of four is just under $40,000. So,
Hmm.
and that's, I was there over 20 years ago. So, a
Hmm.
very different experience than my own kids have growing up
Right,
today.
right.
And what I think and what we know to be true is that individuals who experience some form of trauma in childhood often have this double-edged sword, right?
Hmm.
They have the sort of heartbreaking experience of knowing trauma,
Hmm.
but it gives them these beautiful tools around resiliency to become really powerful leaders.
Yes.
Particularly, the research shows us that you're very, very good at risk assessment and creativity and problem solving. And so I credit a lot of my kind of innovative leadership to some of the challenges I had to navigate as a
Hmm.
child. But I was so lucky to be supported by such a great support network as I went off to college, originally at the College of Southern Idaho, where I had great mentors, and then later in Frederick, Maryland, where I attended Hood College, and ultimately at the University of Baltimore, where I went to
Hmm.
law school in Maryland. And through that experience, I often describe myself to people as a retired journalist, gone lawyer, now leader, who was really transformed by trauma education. And the most important thing I think for listeners to know about who I am, beyond kind of the professional part of my life
Right.
is I'm a mom raising a little boy and a little girl in America. And so the
Yeah.
work we do about creating trauma responsive communities is so deeply personal to the way that I see my own kids navigating the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to be even more specific, which is you gave us a great, kind of picture for you personally, what were some of the patterns
Hmm.
really kind of because what I want people to understand really is behavior runs in patterns. Sometimes people think, oh, I couldn't even begin to start to think about, kind of personal growth or anything. I said, no, there's only a couple stories, and we repeat them over and over and over again. So let's hear the good ones that you really kind of got from this background that enabled you to kind of go through and parent so beautifully, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really lucky. I think of myself as lucky in the way we
Hmm.
describe it because I was adopted by my stepdad at the age of about 7. And he was a really interesting person in my life that taught me a lot of values around hard work and
Hmm.
ethics. And I can't tell you the number of times I say to my team, well, Jim Harwood would say, you don't get points for doing what you're supposed to. You're supposed to do that work. And so I very much grew up both from my mom and my dad, who were entrepreneurs in their own right, trying
Yeah.
to figure out a way to be creative about how we bring resources into the family. Both of them worked, but had their own jobs and their own businesses that they built from the ground up. Kind of watching that really taught me the value of hard work, right?
Yeah.
And I think also this I have like a almost like wisdom to how important purpose in your life is. And I
Hmm.
don't mean purpose from that kind of greater sense like I stumbled into this like beautiful aha moment of now I know what I'm supposed to do with my life.
Yeah.
A sense of purpose from the reality that we can create what purpose looks like in our life and that we
Hmm.
have the abilities and the capabilities and tools to do that. And that purpose might be caring for our families, it might be being an informal leader in our communities, or it might be a leader at work. Whatever that looks like, my parents gave me a really good toolbox to go into the world
Yes.
and build something from that perspective.
Yeah, and you use the word toolbox, which I use all the time because I say that good mental health is not a natural sport. It's a
Yeah.
learned sport,
Yeah.
right? And so we have to have something to grab onto. And a lot of times I'll say to people, how would you know? Nobody ever taught you. How would you know?
Well,
Right?
it's interesting because I think even, I'm first college educated person in my family,
Mhm.
but my parents were so grounded in understanding how to navigate the world in a resourceful way. And so
Mhm.
even if it wasn't sitting down and pulling out the blackboard and kind of walking me through
Right.
leadership strategies, right, or innovation to solve problems, they were showing me with their own
Exactly.
behavior. And I think,
Exactly.
as we think about how we learn these things, so much of it, good and bad, right? And I think about
Hmm.
this now as a parent myself, is really modeled from how we see the people we look up to navigating the world around us.
Exactly. And that's the education. It doesn't have to be formal, right? But it has to be modeled in some way, shape, form, or another,
Right.
somewhere along the line. So let's look at also some of the other patterns maybe that didn't serve you so well, the lessons that you had to learn, kind of the school
Yeah.
of hard knocks kind of thing.
Yeah, I will say for me, that probably came later in my youth as I was getting ready to go off to college on my own, paying for my own college, having to be a young adult in the world really
Mm,
alone, really early, and not alone from not having love and support, but my deprivation was more in the form of resources, right? Knowing
hmm.
that there wasn't a resource safety net to sort of rely on if things went really poorly as a young adult. And I think what I often describe is that that's the double-edged sword of resiliency is it teaches us a lot of really good strategies to navigate adversity and stress. But when
Hmm.
that stress moves beyond challenge stress, right,
Yes.
what often shows up for me now as an adult is that it doesn't matter, how successful I've become in my career, how great my family is at making sure we have a plan and a, kind of financial safety net in place for our family and our kids. My psychological relationship with resources from that young age is so attached to this idea that I could be on my own at any moment, and I have to have and be
Mm,
prepared for how I'm going to navigate not only myself needing to be, being able to rely on myself, but now all these other people that I'm
yes.
responsible for. And it's that psychological relationship that we develop, from these young patterns that is so hard to sort of shake, even as our positioning in life evolves and
Right.
changes and we build a bit more of a safety net.
Right. So the best definition that I learned about stress, and I invite anybody to write this one down because it has served me so well. It's the perceived amount of control that we
Yeah,
think we have or we don't have.
yeah,
So
yeah.
the operative word is perceived,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
and
So
it's so deeply tied to control, right? Like I
it
think,
totally 100%,
yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So people ask me a lot of times, when I speak and if you were to leave me with one thing, what would it be? And it is that question as soon as I feel the stress, what's in
Mm,
my control, what's out of my control?
mm. Oh, that's so important. It's
It
so
just,
interesting too, because when I think about how so much of our kind of challenge in life comes from stress and chronic
mhm.
stress and the inability to sort of develop strategies to navigate the impact of chronic stress on our life, if we had a better understanding, right, of sort of attachment versus a commitment, and how control shows up in the ways that we feel attached to something that we really don't have control over, right? And being able to
Yes.
have acceptance of that. It's something I think a lot about with my kids. And so much of our negative responses to people and environments come from that lack of control. And so
That's
grounding ourselves in like, okay, well, what do we do when we feel that? How do we orient ourselves in what's really important about what we control and we don't control, especially as a leader, becomes really critical.
It absolutely does. And I mean, it's one of my favorite topics because it is so central. So the way that I kind of look at it, and again, hopefully this is helpful to the people who are watching and your people, we have an idea that control means we can control external events.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And when we feel of things going on in the world and all the craziness that's happening at this point, we might feel very, very much out of control. So we have to look at what's in our control, what's out of our control, right? At the same time, because we can't control all these external events,
Yeah.
we have to be able to control ourselves. And so the real control in life is I become at choice. I get to choose how I respond to this,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So it's a
So
very,
important.
very empowering way to, well, I can't control that, but I can control this. Very simple, very quick. And once it becomes a habit, it becomes a lifesaver.
Yeah, it's something I've been talking to my kids a lot about is this idea of like emotions. We should normalize emotions. We should make
Mhm.
them, they're allowed. We should invite them in. But the thing that we often struggle with is that response to the emotion, right?
That's
And
right.
so if we have a sense of like I may not be able to control that the feeling is there.
That's
I'm going to feel that feeling, but what I do get to decide and control is how I'm going to respond to that feeling, both through
exactly.
my behavior and my actions. And what I have found, and I'm curious, Tina, your sort of take on this. Kids that grow up with a lot of, I would say, probably lack of a sense of control
Hmm.
often get very good at a couple of things. And one of the
Hmm.
things I've noticed is they get very good at trying to predict certainty, right? So when
Hmm.
there's lots of uncertainty around them, sort of looking for the ways that they might show up or that they can, to your point, impact the world around them to feel safer or more predictable. And what I
Hmm.
find in adulthood, even in sort of management and supervision and leadership, is that so much of that sense of needing to respond to feeling out of control comes from uncertainty, right? When
That's
people feel
exactly right.
unclear, their brain maps to I'm not in control, I don't know what's coming, and then those two things together create a lot of chaos for people
Hmm.
internally.
Yes. And again, I have a response to that as well. I've been doing this for a while. Ways that I've learned to navigate and also amazing, amazing teachers. So when we feel out of control, Okay. And that feeling of uncertainty, right,
Mm-hmm.
makes people very, very uncomfortable in general because they like to be grounded. They like to know, what's happening next. And at the same time, this is life,
Yeah.
right? So it's about living in the unknown, right? So there are certain things that we do know about the unknown. What do we know? What do you think? What do we know about the unknown?
Well, that at some point it will be known.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah.
So when we have that feeling that, of that uncertain thing, what I do know, it's ungrounded. It feels very ungrounded. It has no predictability. It has no shape. It has no form. But if we stay in it long enough,
Yeah.
it becomes the known.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's learning to be able to identify, just as identifying emotions, learning to
Mhm.
be able to identify, I'm in the unknown right now.
Yeah.
And all my attempts to control it and want to get the answer right now and want it to happen right now, it's not going to happen because that is out of my control. Right. So it's learning how to tolerate that space is
Yeah.
really kind of what I teach a lot.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
important.
it,
Yeah.
and so again, it's another skill, right?
Yeah.
Waiting for results to come back from you know, a test or something like that, whether it's a medical test or whatever kind of test or the bar exam, or you can't make that happen any faster,
Yeah.
right? So it's really kind of learning how to manage these emotions and bringing
Mhm.
the emotions just be.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
they're just, some feel good, some feel not so good, but they're indicators for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, there's so much to talk about with this stuff, and so much that I love to teach and share, and because these are the tools, these are the nuanced tools
Yeah.
beyond just the self-help books.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, how do I really do this?
I know. The
Like
practice.
the
Yeah. It is
practice
just
of
a
it,
muscle. Yeah.
and the repetition and over and over and over again. So, in your family of origin, since a lot of the work that I do, and I'm always interested in hearing from people, how do they deal with conflict?
Interesting. Uh, I haven't really maybe processed this out loud, but I've thought a lot about how I deal with conflict.
Hmm.
And I will say I grew up with one parent who was, I would say, pretty comfortable addressing conflict, and another that was quite avoidant.
Hmm.
And that resulted in me having almost like an over desire to address. I'm like one of those rare people that like when I loved this quote I heard one time that said, you can't have integrity and avoid conflict at the same
Hmm.
time. And that
Good.
feels like so central to like how I operate in the world. And so when I feel like an ounce of conflict, my instinct is like, we got to sit down right now. And, not everyone deals with conflict that way. It's actually quite the opposite. But I think it came from watching someone who had an avoidant response and feeling really, really, really struggling with how I saw that show up and
Hmm.
complicate conflict in the long term.
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. Many people do not want to confront it head on. And yet, what have you learned from when you confront it? What happens?
You know, I will say I don't do it the same way that maybe I did, 10 or 15 years ago. I've learned about how
Hmm.
you have to sort of meet people where they are. And if you
Hmm.
really want, if the goal is to solve the problem, right, with
Hmm.
someone, as opposed to furthering the conflict, the way that we confront it matters. And I've had to learn
Absolutely.
that.
That's right.
But I do find that like it's just so liberating for people to give them the opportunity to feel seen, heard, understood, and how they've experienced something, and to know the impact that behavior has on either them or me, and those around them. And I find it to be quite freeing. I think it can always be, it creates discomfort to have to
Hmm.
be so honest. We don't live in a world where we're like conditioned to
Hmm.
believe that that level of honesty is productive, but it is, to your prior point, when we practice that skill. I have found that it can build a huge amount of resiliency and trust in teams that is far greater than when we don't address the conflict.
Right. So again, if you think about organizations, everything comes from the top, right? So that motto that you have, say it again about the integrity. If there's no
Yeah. You can't have integrity and avoid conflict at the
Yeah.
same time.
Right. And so, with that as a model, I am sure that what you bring down to your team um, reflects that. And one of the other issues around conflict is the concept of trust.
Mm, yeah.
Right? So when people don't address the conflict, and then there's the opportunity for all these white elephants in the room to kind of take space
Yeah.
and really kind of take up the energy, um, the whole culture, the whole workplace is completely reflective of that. So,
That's right.
what have you noticed in your work again as you are willing to do this? How has that impacted your teams?
Yeah, trust is an interesting concept that I've actually thought a lot about. And I think it's because, like most people in our society, I grew up thinking that trust was about heroic moments, right? Where we like
Hmm.
saved the day for someone. And I've had to relearn that trust is how you described it. And recently I heard someone say this at a conference, and it struck me so hard. They said, trust is truth over time,
Hmm.
right?
I
And that
like that
is
too.
so true because it's these little moments where we're interacting with folks, right? And the
Hmm.
way that we're saying we care about them, the way we say we're caring about the organization and the work, they have to see us actually show up in our behaviors and our actions, the way they experience us, the way they experience the team, the organization, as truth, right? Like
Hmm.
the truth over time. And I've struggled with this early in my career as a leader. I would always say like, oh, it's so tough because trust is like respect. Like you can't show up in a room and be
Hmm.
like, respect me or trust me, right? And like, yet you need it. You need it
Yes.
so quickly to build effective teams. And so what I've learned is it's so important. One, all the things that go into creating a space where people can feel and be trusted, right? They
Hmm.
have to feel psychological safety, comfort that they can show up fully as their full self. But ultimately, what it comes down to, and Paul Zach's done some really interesting research around this, I have to do exactly what is expected of me every
Hmm.
single time,
Yes.
right? And the grace for breaking trust is not there. Like it takes one of those moments where I don't show up the way I said I would, and it's gone. Um,
Do you want to hear my favorite thing
yeah,
about leadership?
yeah.
It's about you have about as much room as a crease on a pair of pants. Everybody wants the leader, and
Yeah,
everybody wants to kill the leader off,
yeah, that's exactly right.
right?
Yeah,
So if you are too autocratic, you become the scapegoat.
yeah,
People are talking behind your back, and you lose all trust and respect. If
yeah,
you're too loosey goosey, again, you lose the trust and respect
yeah, yeah,
because they can walk all over you, right?
yeah.
And so when you have so many personalities and so many people from so many backgrounds, all coming from their own perceptions, right? Because that's the other thing about reality. Our reality is our own perception.
Hmm. Hmm.
When we talk about stress, things that might stress the next person for you is like, or vice versa, right? So when we deal with people and leadership and organizations, we have so many complexities of personalities. And, what do you have to stand on, that's got legacy to it.
Hmm.
So I appreciate so much the work that you're doing
Oh, thanks.
and the thought that you put into it.
Well, we have a really good team, and one of the things I've also learned is like you're one person, right? And we have
Mhm.
about 50 other folks, and I don't have the space and time to build a relationship which is so key to living truth
Mhm.
over time, to building trust. But what I can do is I can rely on all the other folks we've put in positions of leadership to be that what we call a chain of trust, right?
Mhm.
And so it becomes
Mhm.
just so critically important that everyone that is on that leadership team is sharing the same commitment to the process and the approach. And again, it only takes sort of one kink in that chain to break that trust for so many folks that at the end of the day, the leader is going to be the
That's
one
right.
accountable,
It's all
right?
about
And this is
you.
why we say we kill leaders off, right? Like we put them there to kill them off because it doesn't matter what goes wrong, good leaders take responsibility and ownership
That's
over
right.
those challenge points. So I've learned a lot about how I have to focus a little bit more on building trust throughout, and not just that individual responsibility that people have to trust me. They really have to trust their supervisor and their supervisor's right? They
That's
have to
right.
trust the chain that gets to me.
Okay, which leads me to my next question. So, being a leader in such a high pressured situation, um, which obviously, as you talked about, has many challenges. What's the biggest challenge that you're facing when it comes to managing your conflict in your teams and
Mhm.
that you lead, or personally, you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but the
Yeah.
biggest challenge?
You know, it's interesting. The answer I have for you today is different than the answer I would have given you a year ago.
Hmm.
And the one a year ago, it hasn't dissipated, it hasn't gone away, but I have a more what I would think of as like clear and present danger challenge. And, a year ago, I would have said culture, like creating and maintaining culture. It's
Hmm.
all of these things. It's the Venn diagram of the people in the right places, the trust, the experience that people have with all the way down to the clients we serve, and just maintaining that culture of like
Hmm.
conflict resolution and restoration when we mess up. I would say that's still important, but the thing I've realized more currently, it's leading during times of uncertainty is
Mm.
incredibly difficult
Yes.
because of what you talked about, because people want to feel some semblance of control about their lives, and whether that's in their personal life or at work, wherever they're feeling that lack of control because of significant uncertainty, it shows up in the way they experience work, in the way they
Yes.
experience their teams and their leaders. And I think for a lot of folks in the workplace, they look to their leadership to
Hmm.
provide a sense of certainty. And when we, because of external forces, don't have the capability to do that honestly, right? I'm not
Right.
going to give
That's right.
people false
Right.
promises. I think there's a natural sense to sort of feel frustration about that
Hmm.
lack of
Hmm.
certainty that can't be created.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. So, what strategies are you attempting currently in the
Yeah.
company to be able to manage this?
Part of it is just continuing to maintain trust by doing what I've said I'm going to do. And that,
Hmm.
to me, goes back to our core values around being transparent. So when I have information, and it's important to know, right, like transparency is the right information at the right time, not all the information all the time. And so people have to trust that we have a good sense of who is the sort of
Right.
right person to get this information at the right time. And so we're trying very hard to communicate quickly when change happens,
Hmm.
knowing that any delay in time is going to create for people more and more opportunities to map to threat and danger, right? So communicating more quickly, communicating often about change that's happening, and then honestly doubling down on the strategies that we were already doing to create
Hmm.
resiliency. Because I think one of the things that workplaces are so prone to doing when people are struggling is to immediately go to like, okay, well, here's the time off policy. Let's get you away from here. And
Yeah.
that can be really important for some folks who need that time and space. But for a lot of folks, sending them off into a world without actually working on building their capacity to suffer, building their
That's right. That's right.
capacity for
Absolutely.
challenge through resiliency, it does not equip them for future challenges at that work environment or other careers. And so some
Absolutely.
of it is really doubling down on like, what do we do to build resiliency in our own teams?
Big, big, big questions. But absolutely critically important. And, as leaders, we have to grow ourselves
Yeah.
because if we don't grow, then the organization doesn't grow. And for every new challenge, um, I like to say we have to be able to absorb more of life's complications and energies so that we can become bigger,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And be able to manage bigger and bigger issues. So I applaud you for that, Bridget. Really, all the hard work and effort and energy that you put into and thoughtfulness. And I think after our last conversation, I may have said this to you, and I'll say it to you again as we end. Women are so capable of running companies,
Yeah.
countries, and we're different in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. Um, and we complement each other. But the things that you talk about in the and the framework and the responsibility and being able to hold all these and run a family at the same time and run this is a big job.
Yeah.
So I thank you for your work.
Oh, well, thank you so much for uplifting that. In our initial conversation, I shared research that is so well known now about women leaders, right?
Yeah.
And it is this challenge of the more compassion you hold, the more people are hardwired to think you're less confident, and the more confident you are, the more people are hardwired to assume that you're, not compassionate. And so I think for women that really value those two things, working in congruence, it can be challenging because of the
Of
biases that
course.
are built into how people expect to experience leaders. And some of it is shifting that expectation, right? We have to
Mhm.
shift what people should expect in the workplace. And I'm so lucky to see so many beautiful women leaders around us, and have that kind of mentorship, and the coaching that folks do to so many leaders is so important. So thank you right back at you for your work and what you're doing to share this conversation, and hopefully give people some, additional tools in their own toolbox to think about the world maybe a little bit differently.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because sometimes it is that just little shift in perception,
Yeah,
right? That
yeah,
moves mountains and ships in different directions. So,
yeah.
how can people get in touch with you, Bridget?
Well, you can always find us at volare-empowers.com or .org, excuse me. My head of engagement is going to get me for that one. volare-empowers.org. And feel free to just look at our website. There's some contact information. They can reach out to me through our website, or if they're interested in just learning more about our work and some of the information that we bring to organizations and companies, they can check out the website there.
Awesome. And then we will have all your contact information when we put out your podcast.
Well, thank
So,
you so
thanks
much.
again
It
for
was
being
great to
with
be
us.
here. Also, this just like fills me up, Tina, like having a thoughtful conversation about how we think about these things. I really get a lot out of it. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Absolutely. Okay, so bye for now. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.